Beautiful. So that's all that we're going to look at for phonetics and phonology. Now moving into morphology and lexicology. So lexicology, as we know, is our study of words, and morphology is the study of morphemes. They're the smaller parts that make up a word. Obviously, word classes apply to lexicology. You're expected to know word classes as part of this subject. Um, I recommend creating those short, really easy definitions for everything that you're not super familiar with. We know a noun is a thing, a verb is an action. Auxiliary verbs are basically helping verbs that go along with the verb, next to the verb. Modal verbs are can, must, should, may, and they can be high modality and low modality. So we could have things like could, can't. It can be more or less definitive. Low modality means it sounds less definitive. So must is a high modality verb, and may is a low modality verb, for example. So they're also split into high and low modality. An adjective is a word that's used to describe a noun, often goes before a noun. An adverb describes something else. Prepositions show relations. Maybe you can use an example of yourself in relation to a box, under, on top of it, over it, where are you located in space. But they're also to do with time, place, etc. So it's relations between different objects. A pronoun is a substitute for a noun. Everyone knows what a pronoun is in 2024, so that's easy. Conjunctions join things together. They're the parts, the little words that help to join a sentence so it sticks. Determiners precede a noun phrase, and interjections occur by themselves. Beautiful. So I recommend just find an example for especially the smaller ones that you think you still might confuse. And we'll look at affixation next. Now we're looking at morphemes, okay? So we know the word affix just means to attach something to something else. And I've included that little definition there to make it a bit easier to grasp what affixation is. So affixation is literally sticking together the morphemes and stems to make words. The morpheme is the smallest possible unit of meaning. It's basically just all the tiny parts that are needed to make up words. Okay? It's not a syllable. It can be, but it's the little parts that are used to make up words. And the stem is the part of the word that if it stood by itself, it would still make sense. So the part of the word that is needed to create its meaning. It's the root of the word that can stand alone. We'll look at it in more detail here because we'll still keep using stems, and what we'll be looking at affixation now. And affixation happens with prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. They're all morphemes attaching to the stems of words in different ways. So a prefix is when you add a morpheme before the stem. That's why it's called pre. Okay? So bicycle, international, prenatal, schizophrenia, supersonic. We see all of these in blue are morphemes that have been added before the stem. So what's the stem? Of course, it's this part. Cycle is the stem. Cycle without the E is the stem of the... cycle with the E is the stem. National is the stem. Natal is the stem. Phrenia is the stem. Sonic, sexual, those are all stems. So a prefix is if there's something added that goes before the stem. A suffix is where a morpheme is added after the stem. So it's the opposite of a prefix. And we see some examples highlighted here. For example, clockwise. Clock is the stem. Wise. It seems like a different word, I know, but it's a suffix that's been added. Now, an infix is where it gets a bit more complicated because this is where we stick a morpheme within the stem. So fan, bloody, tastic. You can see it's literally divided though. in all of these examples, and that's how you'll always usually see them. Okay. And that's why infixes will be easy to find. Just please note that a fantastic are not two different stems. It's one stem that's been split and the infix has been added. All right, morphemes are also divided into free and bound morphemes. Free morphemes are ones that can just stand alone by themselves. You could say it's kind of like the stem of the word, right? You could say it's the same thing. Free morphemes stand on alone and still make sense. So teach is a free morpheme. If you just write down the word teach, that has meaning by itself. It would also be the stem of a word, you could say. Bound morphemes cannot stand alone. If they're not combined with other morphemes, they don't make any sense. So looking at teacher, is bound because doesn't make sense by itself. They need to combine to teach, to make teacher. Beautiful. And then the last sort of type of morphemes are inflectional / derivational. Basically the same thing. They're just synonyms. Usually people call them inflectional morphemes. And we've got these for adjectives, nouns, and verbs. So I've literally just put a table list because there's a limited amount and this is all of them. Okay. Um, so it's probably easier to remember the examples than just the morpheme by itself. So in a way, they do create inflection. They add a bit of meaning grammatically to a word. For example, S for the plural of koalas, right? This morpheme is just helping to show that something is a plural and not one item. And that's a lot of our inflectional morphemes. They just make grammatical meaning to words. Suffixation in Australian English. This is huge. I don't expect, I'm not going to sit here and read all of this. Hopefully you recognize a lot of these. Remember, suffixes are the morphemes at the ends of words changing. So we have a lot of unique ones in Australia, especially O and double consonants, i.e. endings. And this is important when you look at Australian English and you can identify these examples of suffixation as informal features, okay, for an informal text. Still looking at morphology and lexicology, when we think about lexicology and what leads to the creation of new words, I've included the factors that drive word formation and help to create new words. One is technology. We see a couple of words that have been created as a result of technology: clickbait, backspace, wars and conflict as well. Just think about how much vocabulary and the way people have spoken has changed from the Norman conquest to Middle English times. Identity, personal identity, as well as community identity. Some words have been included here as well. As more and more different identities have become accepted by society, more words have resulted, and societal change. So just think about the current prevailing government, and maybe you can think of some words that have been created as a result. Parliament can also legislate definitions of new words to make it less confusing, and in that way, even create words in a sense by giving them that specific definition via legislation. Recent example, this happened with cybersecurity because people were very confused about terminology with regards to cybersecurity. So the government actually put out legislation to define it for use. And these are the kinds of word formations. So all of this falls under a big umbrella term of word formation. So a blend two words blended together. We see that spoon and fork, spork. Acronyms, NASA. If something is an acronym, we don't pronounce it as NASA. That's an initialism, okay? Something is an acronym. These are being pronounced as syllables, NASA. Initialisms, each letter is pronounced separately. Make sure not to get confused between the two. Shortenings, flu is a shortening. Compounding, textbook, putting two words together, but not blending them so it's only parts of them, like in a blend, but actually putting them together. So text and book, making one word. Contractions, don't. So obviously always see this symbol whenever something is a contraction. So won't is a contraction of will not. Don't is a contraction of do not. Collocations, an example is fake news. Conversion, Uber, this used to be this has been converted from a business name into a noun and a verb as well. Neologisms quite literally means very new words. Borrowings, words taken from other languages. And I recommend just gathering some more examples for each of these. So we'll look at conversion in more detail from this list. Conversion of word class is when sometimes existing words change their part of speech, but the initial meaning isn't necessarily lost. So nouns often changing into verbs is the most common. The meaning isn't necessarily lost, okay? But it can be used in a different way in a sentence. That's why I said Uber, can be, it used to be just a business name, but now it's a noun, it's a verb also. I'm Ubering somewhere, okay? That's standard to say. So conversion has occurred. But conversion has to involve no added morphemes. There isn't a prefix or a suffix or an infix that just appears. So inbox me as an example. Inbox just used to be a noun. It can be used as a verb as well, has been for a long time now.